All right, so welcome to part 2 of this video on using your HS code to figure out your export markets. We're going to follow up with our discussion on this chapter code of the HS schedule, the harmonized schedule. This is beer from malt. We're just going to continue with this because it's from yesterday's training video that we worked on. But this is something I want to mention that we didn't mention yesterday. This 6-digit number right here is used worldwide. I don't think we mentioned this enough, and we need to talk about this some more. This 6-digit number is used worldwide to calculate the data for all these things coming in. So when a box of whatever it is, actually in this case, let's say a container of beer comes into a country, on the bill of lading, and we're going to get into bill of lading and some packing information later on, but on the bill of lading, this 6-digit number is listed on there, and it tells you exactly where the product is from and what it exactly is. So they don't actually have to open the container. They're kind of going on the fact that you are saying this is where it's from and that is what it is. So what we do is we use this 6-digit number. Now all the customs offices around the world are using this and saying, okay, a container came in with this 6-digit number and the value on the container was X. And so every year they aggregate all of that data and put that data together and then put it online. Here is the secret first part of where we get our data and we start looking. This is absolutely free to anybody in the world. You can pull up the data from this website and figure out the secondary information about the resources. Now I will caution you before I even talk about this, really what we're talking about is secondary data. It is not first data. It's not you actually going out there and looking at the bill of lading yourself. You're relying on those governments around the world to bring this data in. The organization that does this is called the UN Comtrade. It's basically the United Nations Commercial Trade Database, repository for all trade statistics around the world. It goes back all the way to 1962, and it actually updates monthly, which is great for us in the business world, and I use this all the time for my clients. Monthly trade statistics since 2010. This is important for me with a lot of my clients, and for a lot of you watching this, is because you need to know exactly month by month where the flows of data are going. There are some neat things in the UN Comtrade database. One of them is an observed economic complex. If you get into trade data, this is something that you need to be looking at. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to show you simply how to go through UN Comtrade. Use this data to create a basic understanding of the international market for what you're doing. How you do this, very, very simple. Because we're exporting, we really don't want to look at imports in the market. So we want to make sure that we're doing exactly what we need to do. We want to look at the goods going, the frequency, we want to look at the annual data, the harmonized code. This is the HS code that we were talking about, the harmonized system, the number we just had from our last data set. We want to use the most recent data, which is 2012. Every 5 years they re-aggregate the numbers and they make sure that they report all together correctly. So we're going to go to 2012. We're going to make sure we use 2015. You can't use 2016 because it's not ready yet. To get the monthly data, you have to go into a different system. We want to make sure that the reporters, these are the people who are actually collecting the data, is every country around the world, and we want to also make sure that the partners are the world. Now, here is a way to do this. The world is, the reporters would be all, so this would list all the countries, and this would just list all of the world. You can do an individual market. So if I wanted to say, let's say I wanted to just use, let's just use the US as an example. USA, everybody reporting import sales from the USA, I'm going to change this to import, in this category. So how we set this up, it goes period, 2015, reporters, every country, which is all around the world, the partners, who it's coming from, let's just say the USA for the purposes of this, and the trade flows, and let's look at the imports of that product. Our product harmonized code is 2203. 00, which is beer made from malt. It's really actually easy. You can do this either way. Beer made from malt, and it'll actually come up the same way. So you could actually import the code two different ways. We really like to look on the census data website, this website first, because there are some things in the legal notes that might change it that are different from UN Comtrade. So going back to UN Comtrade 220300, beer made from malt. Now we want to preview this data. It might give us more than 500 rows. Okay, it actually worked out. So now here's a listing alphabetically of all the reporter countries who imported beer from the United States. We really don't want to look at an alphabetical. We want to look at one of two things. We want to look at the trade value or the net weight. Now, there's two different ways to think about this. The trade value could be tricky because they might be importing at a different price. That's not the biggest issue. The net weight is pretty much always going to be the same. I mean, you're going to see, obviously, when the net weight goes in there, so does the trade value. So it looks very, very similar. The one thing that we talk about with this is we use trade value as a reporter because people are going to have to report the correct trade value in order to make sure that their customs and duties are correct. We're going to talk about that in a later video that we're going to put together. But you can see by clicking on trade value and aggregating it from the highest value to the lowest value, here are all the countries importing from Mexico, from the U.S. to Mexico, of this value. And it looks like, and it actually is true because I've worked with this in the past with a few other companies, Mexico and Canada are the largest importers of U.S. beer products in the world, which is actually what we know to be completely true. It's interesting to think that you would think that some other countries would report higher values, like, oh, there'd be a lot of German beer. It's not necessarily the truth because they report different numbers, and I'll explain that in just a second. But your top 10 markets for importers of beer: Mexico, Canada, Chile, Panama, Australia, Paraguay, Sweden, Republic of Korea, United Kingdom. One thing we're going to talk about in a little bit later video is free trade agreements with the United States. And it just so happens that the top 5 markets have free trade agreements with the U.S. Actually, Paraguay does too, and so does the Republic of Korea. So in the top 10 markets, 8 of the top 10 markets have a free trade agreement with the United States. And then right down here, number 11, 12, and then 14 have free trade agreements also. 15 has one too. So you can see where free trade agreements go, so does the sales. So as we get more into these videos on trade flows, we're going to look at this data and figure out how important this data is in our set. Is the data correct? Where could we see some advantages? Where could we see some disadvantage? Now, the one thing that stands out to me, there are a few markets in Europe that import a lot of beer. I've been to Germany quite a few times. I've seen Budweiser, Bud Light, and I guarantee you they're importing more than $1 million. What just so happens that if you go to number 2, you look down the list, you go, okay, there's France, that's $2 million in trade value. That seems about right. If we go farther down, we're looking, Ireland's here, $2 million. Germany's here, that's $2 million. It just so happens that sometimes countries report less than they actually have to. And that's why this is called secondary data. They might not report as much as they should because they don't want to be seen as importing too much product into their market of a certain country or a certain product category. Could you imagine if Germany, the home of beer, was importing more U.S. beer than they were actually exporting? It's not going to happen, obviously, because we import about $100 million worth of German beer a year. But if they were to say, oh, we now import a lot of this, I can tell you for a fact this number might be skewed. But we are on the right track figuring things out with the trade values around the world. So what we like to do is use this data to start building the next exporter profile for our company. We want to make sure that we are figuring out where the exports are going around the world so we have an idea of where we should be as well. I'll give you a hint. if you're exporting to a market and the U.S. is already exporting there, you're going to have an easier time getting into the market than, let's say, going to the last country on this market, which is Hungary or Lithuania or the Republic of Tanzania, where the trade value is only worth $150. So somebody was personally importing U.S. beer to these markets or something like that. So make sure that you follow the trend. We talked about that in one of our articles online, that the trend is your friend. Where other companies are going, you might want to think of as well, because there is demand. Now, what we're going to do in the next video series is we're actually going to look at yearly trade flows and look at the statistics. But for you as a company just starting out trying to pull this data by yourself, make sure that you figure out the top 10 markets, write down those markets, and then we're going to look at the next video, we're going to look at free trade agreements, but also customs and tariffs and duties, so you can kind of make an idea of where you should be looking. This is all homework leading up to actually talking to somebody in the market about those products or services. We hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you next time to talk about free trade agreements, customs, tariffs, and duties, and taxes, and some of the other things you should be worried about or be looking into when you're starting to build an export profile.